This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, March 18th. Welcome to Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. This is today's Africa 54. We begin on a somber note. Tanzanian President John Magufuli has died at a hospital in Dar es Salaam. His vice president announced on state television on Wednesday. David Doyle has the report.
Tanzania's President John Magufuli has died, it was announced on Wednesday. Speaking on state television, Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan said Magufuli had died of a heart condition at a hospital in Dar es Salaam. The 61-year-old, one of Africa's most prominent coronavirus skeptics, had not been seen in public since the end of February. Speculation was rife that he had contracted COVID-19. Magufuli had denounced measures to stop the spread of the virus and labelled vaccines a Western conspiracy. Last week, officials denied he was ill. Government figures also said Magufuli was working normally and that citizens should ignore rumours from outside the country. Tanzanian police have arrested 4 people since last week for allegedly spreading false information about the health of political leaders.
David Doyle of Reuters with that report. Tanzania's leadership faced calls for a smooth succession on Thursday following the death of President John Pombe Magufuli. An opposition leader urged the immediate swearing-in of Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan as successor. Zitto Kabwe, speaking to Reuters by phone from Dar es Salaam on Thursday morning, said that would avoid a constitutional vacuum and prevent uncertainty. Magufuli's death, the first of a Tanzanian leader while in office, opens the prospect that the country will gain its first female president. The constitution says Hassan, 61, should assume the presidency for the remainder of the 5-year term that Magufuli began serving last year after winning a second term. Hassan addressed the nation on television late on Wednesday, saying Magufuli had died from the heart disease that had plagued him for a decade. She said burial arrangements were underway for the 61-year-old leader, but did not indicate when she would be sworn in. Although Hassan publicly championed Magufuli's leadership style and frequently represented him abroad, she has been more soft-spoken and less confrontational than the president. If sworn in to serve the remainder of Magufuli's second term, Hassan would be the East African nation's first female president and the only female currently holding executive power in the region. Uganda on Wednesday launched a rapid COVID-19 antibody test partly funded by France that developers hope to market in sub-Saharan Africa, where the laboratory infrastructure needed for extensive novel coronavirus testing is thin. The test, which requires a finger prick to draw blood, was developed by a team at Makerere, Uganda's oldest public university, with partial funding from the French embassy. The East African country has long experience of infectious diseases like HIV and Ebola, which it has drawn on to develop diagnostics expertise. The kit, which has been approved by Uganda's state-run National Drugs Authority, has an accuracy rate of 70%, but researchers hope eventually to raise that to 90%. This is a story told through an intriguing film title, but one that makes you think about the food you eat and where that food comes from. I spoke to Finian Makepeace, co-founder, policy director, and lead educator at Kiss the Ground organization, and began by asking him what inspired him to produce the film Kiss the Ground.
About 8 years ago, myself and other co-founder were inspired to help get the word out. When we learned about this big solution, about rebuilding soil, the potential for humanity to be stewards of helping nature build soil faster than we ever thought was even possible, this seemed like something that was almost too good to be true. So that was the kind of impetus of the organization. And then about a year into the organization, we met Josh and Rebecca Tickell and were able to convince them to begin a project creating the film, Kiss the Ground.
There's so much bad news about our planet, it's overwhelming. Truth is, I've given up. This is the story of a simple solution, a way to heal our planet. The solution is right under our feet, and it's as old as dirt.
The film says the solution is right under our feet, but many people have no idea what agriculture is all about. Talk to us about that.
So we like to phrase regenerative agriculture is agriculture that's causing regeneration. So when we think about regeneration, for something to regenerate, it has to have been hurt, harmed, or degenerated, right? It has to be broken somehow to have it heal itself. So when we look at our soil and our land, a lot of our land that's been in agriculture has been degraded or depleted. So the soil that makes up our land has been degraded, and we can see this in the desertification and loss of biomass on our land. This amazing thing about the solution being under our feet is the carbon in our atmosphere, Esther, that's currently causing a global warming effect, is the very building block. Well, soil's also alive. So if we take the carbon out of the atmosphere, help plants pump that liquid sugar back into the ground, that liquid carbon back into the ground, we can build topsoil that's faster than we ever thought possible. So this is sequestering carbon at an immense scale. So the more severe weather, the more flooding, the more droughts that we face, when we have healthy soil, we can become more resilient, and we can help our fresh water supplies return. We can create abundance of food that's healthy, and so many other incredible factors that come with it.
So there's a little bit of science here, and it may be a little complex for people who don't know anything about agriculture, and especially what you just talked about, regenerative agriculture. Can you explain that in layman's language?
The structure of this is made from carbon, and that carbon came from carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So if we look at a leaf then, we say, well, the leaves, using energy from the sun, leaves are pulling in carbon dioxide that's in our atmosphere. In their stomata, they're using the energy of the sun and taking the carbon from carbon dioxide, connecting it with hydrogen and oxygen from H2O, water, and making carbohydrates. We didn't know that 30 to 40% of these liquid sugars are being pumped into the ground to feed microbes in the soil. And those microbes create soil aggregates. They build the soil, in essence. So essentially, the short version of it is plants pull in carbon, and the soil microorganisms store it.
Let's turn to Africa's agriculture, where most people might argue it's mainly organic anyway. But as we know, things are changing very quickly in the continent as farmers look for new methods that cut down time to harvest. How do you change that mindset?
Well, the push for more mechanical and more amendments like fertilizers and even pesticides and herbicides and fungicides is increasing at an alarming rate through all of Africa, really, as production and bigger companies are coming in there expecting larger production, quicker increases there in yield and everything. Because when we're dealing with brittle environments all across Africa, we're dealing with land that's already fragile. That's where we're headed with big industrial chemical agriculture. Inevitably, the land will be degraded and it'll be left to die. It's done. It'll be too beat up.
We can fix a lot of our climate issues if we bring the CO2 down into a living plant and put it back into the soil where it belongs.
Plants working with soil microorganisms, it seems too simple.
Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy human, healthy climate.
Moving to regenerative management is going to allow farmers to have more fertility versus less as things go. That means less input costs. That means more abundance, more regional sovereignty, water security, etc.
Join us tomorrow for part 2 of my interview with Finian Makepeace, co-founder of the film Kiss the Ground, where he talks about a dream he had at age 27 that changed his life. United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet has agreed to an Ethiopian request for a joint investigation in the country's northern Tigray region, where Bachelet says possible war crimes may have been committed. Fighting between government troops and the region's former ruling party the Tigray People's Liberation Front has killed thousands of people and forced hundreds of thousands from their homes in the mountainous region of about 5 million. The United Nations has raised concerns about atrocities being committed in Tigray, while U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has described acts carried out in the region as ethnic cleansing. Ethiopia has rejected Blinken's allegation. The United Nations and the United States have demanded that Eritrean troops leave Tigray. Egypt is racing to prepare a grandiose new capital city in the desert east of Cairo before the first civil servants move in this summer, and ahead of the delayed official opening of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's flagship project. Emily Wither reports.
Away from the chaos of overcrowded Cairo, a new capital is rising from the desert east of the city. Civil servants are due to start moving here this summer, ahead of the official opening planned for the end of 2021. Workers are putting finishing touches to an avenue of ministries that echo the architecture of pharaonic temples. There will be a monorail passing through a business district where a 385-metre central tower is close to completion. A 10-kilometre park stretching to a giant mosque is also taking shape. Known simply as the new administrative capital, the city is being designed as a high-tech model for Egypt's future. It will boast universities, leisure facilities, and a diplomatic quarter. Control centres will monitor infrastructure and security electronically, and roofs will be covered in solar panels. Khaled, el-Husseiny is the spokesman for the new capital.
We are aiming to facilitate the citizens' life. We are aiming to have a cashless community in the new capital. We are trying to solve all the problems we had in the past in the new capital.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's flagship project has made halting progress. Emirati funding fell through shortly after it was announced in 2015. The military and government took on the estimated $25 billion cost of the first phase, injecting off-budget investment. Some foreign loans and financing have been secured, including a Chinese loan that's helped fund the business district. How far and how fast Egypt's centre of gravity shifts away from Cairo to the new capital, 45 kilometres from the Nile, is unclear. For now, thousands of residential blocks stand empty either side of a highway leading into the new city. The completion of the business district, yet to be marketed, is set for 2023. Sisi says other regions will not be neglected. And while there's support for the government's argument that the new capital can reduce congestion in Cairo, there is also concern that it will be unaffordable and inaccessible to many.
That was Emily Wither of Reuters reporting. Coming up, a non-profit reopens a zoo left behind with starving animals by former Burkina Faso president 7 years ago. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. Though Washington is the seat of U.S. political power, its residents have no voting rights in Congress nor rights of full home rule because of its unique status as the federal capital. But advocates for making Washington, D.C. a state say they see more potential than ever. VOA's Carol Gansberg has our report.
When rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol in a failed attempt to stop Congress from certifying the presidential election of Joe Biden, Washington's Mayor Muriel lacked the authority to call in the National Guard to help police. The episode has given new momentum to the District of Columbia's long-running effort to become a state.
I'm upset that 706,000 residents of the District of Columbia did not have a single vote in that Congress yesterday, despite the fact that our people were putting their lives on the line to protect our democracy.
The district lacks local autonomy. Its budget and local laws, unlike those of states, are subject to approval by Congress. Its residents pay federal taxes but cannot send someone to Congress to cast votes on their behalf. Eleanor Holmes Norton has championed statehood for 3 decades as the district's non-voting delegate to the House of Representatives.
The United States is the only country that denies the residents of its capital city the same rights that everybody else has.
Norton introduced legislation, passed by the House last year, that would shrink the federal district to 2 square miles, including the Capitol, White House, and other major government buildings and monuments. The district's remaining 66 square miles would become the new state. The legislation was reintroduced in January with even more backers.
What is important is that we have the support of the new President of the United States, Joe Biden, as well as the support of the leaders of the Senate and of the House. That's a trifecta that's hard to beat.
But Republicans in Congress oppose statehood. Because the district's voters overwhelmingly support Democrats, that would mean 2 more Democrats in a Senate that is now evenly divided between the 2 major parties. Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson says Washingtonians do deserve representation, just not in a separate new state. His proposed legislation would make most of the district part of the neighboring state of Maryland, without adding seats in the House or Senate.
And if what D.C. residents really want is suffrage, if what they want is a voice in the United States Senate, my plan gives them that. I would say in the last 200 years, every single state that has been made a state has had either 6 million residents or has been 10,000 square miles. Washington, D.C. fails both of those tests.
But joining another state is just not acceptable to Washington pharmacist Owowela.
We don't want to be residents of Maryland. We want to be D.C. residents. We also want to have our own voice. We want to be the 51st state, not to be absorbed in another one.
D.C. voters elected Owowela last fall as a backup delegate in the House of Representatives. He was born in the U.S. to parents from Nigeria, where residents of the federal capital region do have legislative representatives with voting rights. Attorney Paul Strauss is one of the district's 2 elected shadow senators, again without voting rights. His goal is
to educate both Americans and the world about the importance of D.C. statehood and making sure that the United States lives up to the ideals that it preaches around the world.
A House panel will consider Norton's bill this month. While it may pass in the democratically controlled House, it is unlikely to pass in the Senate, where Democrats have only a slim margin of control. Carol Gunsberg, VOA News, Washington.
More than 650 copies of Dr. Seuss books have sold around the world since author Theodore Seuss Geisel published his first title in the 1930s. The prolific author of books like The Cat in the Hat is credited with helping millions of children learn to read. But this month, Dr. Seuss Enterprises announced it will no longer publish 6 of the celebrated author's books due to racist and insensitive imagery. VOA's Dora McQuarrie has our report. But first, a warning: the story you're about to watch contains images that many may find offensive.
The offending images in the 6 canceled Dr. Seuss books contain stereotypes of Black people, Asians, and Arabs. Dr. Seuss author Theodore Seuss Geisel died in 1991. But this year on his birthday, the company founded by Dr. Seuss's family decided to stop printing 6 of his books because they portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong.
He often sees national or ethnic or racial difference as exotic and as fun or as funny. In highlighting the exotic of somebody or the otherness of somebody as a point of amusement, you are telling people that national or ethnic or racial difference can be the punchline. And that is painful if you are a member of the group who is the punchline.
Allegations of racial stereotypes in the author's work aren't new. The Dr. Seuss Museum in the author's hometown of Springfield, Massachusetts, removed a mural after complaints. The mural depicted a Chinese character with slanted eyes, chopsticks, and a pointed hat.
The librarians have known about this for a long time and have been discussing this for decades.
Jason Homer heads up a library system not far from the Dr. Seuss Museum. He says the author's books are not particularly popular at his libraries, but they will stay on the shelves.
In the top 100 children's checked out titles last year, only one Dr. Seuss book appeared, and that was Cat in the Hat. We're moving these books because people might object, are very much go against what we stand for as a public library. We want to provide materials. Our job is to enlighten, enrich, and inform our community.
Offensive at best and horribly racist at worst.
Geisel's racist imagery exists outside of his popular children's books. He published political cartoons during World War II containing harmful stereotypes of Japanese Americans that questioned their patriotism.
Supposedly Japanese figures with cookie-cutter faces, all of them similar, all of them male, marching down from Washington and Oregon into California to pick up blocks of TNT explosive. And the title of the cartoon is Waiting for the Signal from Home. The guy on the roof has a telescope pointed toward Japan.
There's evidence the author regretted his early depictions of non-white people. Some of his later books include lessons on tolerance and inclusion.
People often think of racism as either or. You're on team racism or you're not, and that's not actually how it works. You know, Seuss is on both teams.
Philip Nell heads up the children's literature program at Kansas State University. He views the removal of the 6 Seuss books as an appropriate product recall.
Also, as a child, I think you're absorbing things that you don't know you're absorbing. You are learning things without your consent. These ideas, these images just start to populate your brain without you signing on to the idea that it's okay to mock people for being different or kind of highlight their exoticism to be amusing.
It's the end of the story for these 6 titles, but dozens of beloved Dr. Seuss books remain in print for future generations of children to discover. Dora McQuarr, VOA News, Washington.
There are no words or statistics that can accurately detail what the Syrian people have lost in 10 years of civil war. But as they mark this gruesome 10-year anniversary, people in Idlib, the last opposition stronghold in Syria, try to take stock of what has been destroyed and what, if anything, has been gained. VOA's Heather Murdoch has this report with Shadi Turk in Idlib.
11-year-old Tasnim Hasan and her family fled their home a year ago as government forces bombed her village here in Idlib, the last opposition stronghold, where nearly 1/4, 23%, of Syria's 17.5 million people now live. They went to 8 camps before they found a place to stay. The other camps were crowded and without running water. They would wait for it to rain so they could drink or cook. They finally found a camp with water and other humanitarian aid, but now it's mostly cut off.
Sometimes they bring us hygiene kits, but we don't want that. We need things for children like diapers, milk, and food. We want to eat. It has been 2 months since we received any food aid.
Tasnim doesn't remember a time before the war, but she remembers losing an uncle, her grandmother, 2 cousins, beloved family friends, and now, she says, hope.
I dreamed that we were happy and going back to our village. It was like before, and our home wasn't destroyed. But those are dreams. Everything will stay like it is.
She says when her village was attacked, her father's life was saved by a member of the White Helmets, a volunteer rescue group that operates in Syrian opposition areas. Ibrahim Mohammed has served with the White Helmets since 2014 and says he has pulled countless bodies, alive and dead, from the rubble of bombed-out buildings, including babies. He dropped out of college and lost his home and so many countrymen, but he did not lose everything.
We are living in the north with freedom, dignity, and on our land. We've lost so many people. Everyone has lost someone from their family.
The battles are almost over in most of Syria, and some analysts have declared President Bashar al-Assad the apparent winner. But rebel groups are in control of Idlib and nearby regions, and locals almost universally say they will flee or fight before trying to live in a government-controlled area. The war is at a stalemate, characterized by sporadic violence and a deepening humanitarian crisis. But 10 years on, locals say, it is not over. Heather Murdoch, VOA News.
When former President Blaise Compaoré fled Burkina Faso 7 years ago, he left behind a zoo of lions, ostriches, hippos, and hyenas, which began starving to death. A non-profit stepped in to rescue them last year and has reopened the zoo to the public. Henry Wilkins reports from Ziniare.
Former Burkina Faso President Blaise Compaoré left behind a private zoo that included crocodiles, gorillas, hippos and lions. He continued to pay for the zoo, but the management team neglected the animals. The Association for the Protection of Fauna and Flora in Burkina Faso last year found animals like lioness Alma emaciated and starving.
Alma,
I think, had about 1 or 2 weeks left to live, but maybe even that's optimistic. Perhaps a matter of days, and she would have died. The fact that 1 year later she still finds herself on her feet and eating is really a miracle.
The baboons, gorillas, porcupines and tigers were among the animals that didn't survive. But Alma and the other lionesses recovered along with a host of other animals. Compaoré gave the APFF-BF power of attorney over the animals, and the zoo was open to the public with a small entrance fee.
The major challenges have been to find funding for animal feed. It's a big expense, you just don't realise it. There are more than 40 animals in the zoo, many of which are carnivores, so it costs a lot of money.
The zoo gets by on donations. Burkina Faso's violent insurgency dropped tourism and budgets for animal conservation.
There were good periods before the onset of insecurity in 2017. We had a budget of around $550,000. But for 2020 and 2021, I'm wondering if we'll even have a budget of $36,000.
As for Alma, she's become a much-loved symbol of the zoo's recovery.
We found aggressive, angry animals that no longer had hope in anything, and today, hope is returning to this park.
Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Zinare, Burkina Faso.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.